Morning Ryan. I'm your host, Ryan Anastasio. Today I have a very special guest, the Governor of Connecticut, Dan Malloy. Governor, thank you very much for coming on. How are you?
I'm doing well and happy to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Thank you for making the time for us. You've been governor for 7 years now, and you're currently in your last year as governor. The job is very stressful, time-consuming, and it's extremely important as you lead this great state of Connecticut. Looking back on your term, have you enjoyed your time as governor?
Yeah, more often than not, I've enjoyed it. Obviously, there are a lot of challenges and hard decisions that have to be made, and successes and disappointments. But all in all, being governor is okay.
What do you think your biggest accomplishment has been?
I don't think there's any one. I think there's a whole bunch of them. I think educational improvement, particularly in our urban school districts, is very important. I think adding jobs has been very important. I think long-term investment in things like transportation are extremely important. I think what we've done at the University of Connecticut and our community colleges and regional universities has been very, very important. I just think that there's been a good body of work. We've also taken on some big issues. My administration is the first administration to ever properly fund its long-term obligations. It's never been done before. As a result, our state is billions and billions of dollars behind where it needs to be. And it amazes me that as the 88th governor, I'm the only one who's actually dealt with the issue.
Yeah. Any regrets looking back on your time?
No, I don't live in regrets, nor do I live in the past. I think it's largely about the future. I mean, I think that when we look at Connecticut and understand the challenges that Connecticut has as an older state, population-wise, as a state that didn't adjust to changes in manufacturing and the fact that fewer people would be employed in manufacturing, that we didn't invest in our higher education, or for that matter, we didn't invest in higher education to the extent we should have and that other states did, and that we didn't follow through on the promises we made on elementary through high school education. Those things will gang up on you. They'll amount to something, and I think that Connecticut citizens would like to have an easy explanation of that and an easy change in trajectory of those issues. But that's not what happens. What happens is you have to do really hard things and really hard work, and you have to get the job done.
And a lot of people may look back at your term and look at instances such as GE and Alexion leaving. Do you think there's anything you could have done to prevent those companies from leaving the state?
I mean, I think GE. No, I don't think there were things that could be done. I mean, GE. I think there was a failed leader at the company who was looking for an explanation, quite frankly, to cover his tracks. He used to talk to me about the state's growing pension obligation and the fact that it wasn't properly funded, to which I would point out, well, I'm the first governor who was actually trying to fund it and making agreements that lower the cost of those benefits at the very time that he was driving their pension into bankruptcy. So listen, I think the president of the company decided that he needed a change of scenery, that his kids had graduated from schools and that he was ready for that change, and that change would somehow fit into the things that he had been saying about repositioning the company as, in essence, a computer company. Well, that effort's failed. He's failed, and at the same time, a state like Massachusetts was willing to pay $130 to $160 million to have, quote unquote, the headquarters of a company, but only 200 jobs went there.
Yeah, there's still jobs here, right?
Oh, well, listen, Connecticut is a leading state as the home of Fortune 500 companies. One of those companies, Synchrony, is a very large part of GE, which is now based and run out of Connecticut. There's those realities that and even as we speak today, GE is about shrinking itself. It's not about enlarging itself. So I just think that some bad decision making over a long period of time caught up with the company.
And Jeff Immelt, the CEO you were talking about, he said he wanted to move to a state with a more pro-business environment. You think he's wrong when he says that Connecticut doesn't have a pro-business environment?
I think what he said about the move is not terribly important based on what we now know of how he was running the company.
So you think it was all he just wanted to move to Boston?
I think that the apparent strategy of the company was to take an industrial company and in essence change it into a different company, and that strategy failed. But before he admitted failure and before he was asked to leave, that's the strategy that they were pursuing, and they thought that being in Boston was a better place for that strategy. Since that decision was made, the strategy has changed very substantially, and he's
a new CEO now. Yeah.
And, a new CEO who, by the way, is on record of saying that if he had been the head of the company, they never would have moved from Connecticut.
Yeah. And during your time as governor, many companies have expanded in the state also, and we heard the great news of United Technologies adding new jobs here. Do you think this can be a game changer for the state with companies like United Technologies adding jobs here into the state and across the country?
Well, that genesis of United Technologies growing in Connecticut really goes back to a transaction that we effectuated in 2014, which allowed that company to monetize research tax credits that they had earned by investing in new engine development. The problem was that there was no vehicle for them to monetize those. So in exchange for helping them recognize those tax credits in dollar terms, they agreed to spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in Connecticut to expand their presence, to build a new engineering center in Connecticut, to modernize their manufacturing base both in East Hartford and into Middletown. And that was the announcement that you're referencing as just having been made is a reference to an agreement that we actually effectuated in 2014. It takes a while for those kinds of transactions to catch up.
And the CEO, Gregory Hayes, he said part of it was due to Trump's tax cuts. Think that played a role at all?
Listen, I think he's a great leader and has done a wonderful job at United Technologies and has sold well and purchased well other companies. A very different situation than some other recent corporate leaders from Connecticut. Having said that, I don't think we should separate any one discussion from the reality of what's playing out in the country. And yes, there were tax changes. It's now estimated that those tax changes are saving corporations a lot of money. But if you ask me what's driving manufacturing at United Technologies, it's a backlog of 7,500 engine orders. Engines that a good percentage of will be made here in Connecticut at two very modern facilities, and they're modern because they've been invested in.
Yeah, and you've said many times that you inherited a mess from your predecessors. Can you tell us some of the problems that you inherited and what have you done to try to alleviate these problems?
Listen, I guess inherited a mess. Have I put it that way? Maybe I have. There were problems. I think that there are differences in Connecticut that are quite obvious when compared to other states, even our own neighborhood. New York State fully funded its pension obligations to its employees. Connecticut never properly funded its pension obligations. Therefore, we have this big bill that's coming due as employees retire that weren't funded. And it fell on someone to straighten that out, and that's what we did. Now, my immediate predecessors actually made that problem worse. Not only did they not properly fund the obligations, but they gave away more dollars to employees. And they had agreements to continue the policy of not properly funding those obligations. That's a mess. I guess if I use that term, that's what I'm describing. I think there was also a lack of investment in infrastructure, transportation, and higher education being two of those particular areas, but there are others. But to address those issues, you have to do really hard things, and particularly in an environment where people became used to someone leading them to believe that everything was okay. One of the things about making change is you actually have to explain reality to people about why they have to make change. When you explain to people about how dangerous the situation is that they've been operating under, you're going to get pushback. And people would rather be told that this is going to be easy, or that there aren't painful things that have to be done to effectuate that change. That's simply not the case. It's hard.
Yeah. And as governor, you don't work by yourself. You're working with the legislature all the time. And some legislators on the Republican side have said you're very hard to work with, and you've been sidelined sometimes in the budget process. Why do you think it's so hard to work with the legislators to pass things such as a budget?
Well, you have to remember what Republicans did when they stepped in on the budget. They raised taxes. Republicans who said...
You've raised taxes before also, right?
Republicans, wait a minute. So Republicans who said that you shouldn't raise taxes and the governor should be unpopular because he raised taxes. The first thing they did, and that, in fact, in both budgets that they have played a major role in, was to raise taxes.
Was it the income tax, or was it?
It was a combination of taxes. There's no single one tax. There's lots of things. They're taxing things that weren't taxed. They're taxing things at additional rates. They raised taxes. They don't want you to report that. They don't want anyone to know that the number one thing they did when they had a role to play in developing a budget was to not roll taxes back, to not undo what I had done, but in fact to raise taxes even more.
Yeah, and just a few weeks ago it was announced that sports betting could now be legal across the United States, and this could be a good thing for Connecticut. And you've talked about the possibility of calling a special session to deal with this. What's it at right now? Are you going to have a special session to talk about sports betting?
It remains a possibility. Connecticut's situation is a little complicated
with the tribes,
based on our compacts with the two tribal nations that operate casinos in our state that give them some level of or some level of protection, or that tribal nations don't have in other states. That compact was negotiated in the 1990s, and so what I've said is we need to address the compact before we can address the broader issue, and so we're attempting to reach agreement and understanding with the Indian tribal nations on that subject. If we reach such an agreement, and if it's to go forward, that would then require the legislature to act.
Yeah. You think this may be able to happen this year?
I think it's up in the air whether it can. I think, again, we have to reach an agreement on the compacts that govern Connecticut's relationship with two sovereign tribal nations. If we can get by that hurdle, then I think it is possible. If we can't get by that hurdle, if there's no agreement, then there's no sports betting in Connecticut. And
this year, they were trying to put a casino in Bridgeport, and it failed this year. Why do you think it failed? Do you think a casino in Bridgeport is a good idea?
Well, you're asking a whole bunch of questions there. Again, we have a exclusive agreement with two sovereign tribal nations that give them the sole power to operate casinos if they continue to pay a substantial fee to the state of Connecticut. In the absence of that exclusive option to the tribal nations, then they are no longer obligated to make those payments to the state. Those payments in the tune of about $200 million to $250 million. Now that may shrink over time as gaming becomes even more ubiquitous in other states, but that's a substantial amount of money to give away. And I think that the issue is much more complicated about where do you want to have casinos. It's around the issue of who operates them, what it does to our agreements, our compacts with the tribal nations, and how that plays itself out on a revenue basis.
And you talked about infrastructure before, and the state does have some infrastructure issues, and Some people have talked about the possibility of bringing tolls in to deal with this. Do you think tolls is a good solution, and do you think we can maybe see tolls in the next few years?
You know, I don't know what the legislature will do in the future. I know this, that revenue from carbon is going away, that cars will go further and further on gasoline, and that more and more cars will be manufactured that don't use carbon as the primary fuel. They'll use electricity as the primary fuel. When that happens,
The gas tax.
the gas tax becomes less and less and less valuable. The gas tax as it currently exists in Connecticut is not supporting a state of good repair for our transportation system. As that money shrinks, the question then becomes, what do you do to replace it? Now we are one of the few states on the eastern seaboard that have no tolls, so that's an easy thing to look at and wonder why. And we know that 30% of the users of our highways are cars that are registered in other states. So, and presumably aren't buying a whole lot of gasoline in Connecticut, and therefore not contributing to the maintenance of the system. So in the absence of gas and oil taxes supporting transportation, the legislature and a future governor is going to have to wrestle, okay, what is the answer? Do we raise this money in tolls? Do we raise this money income tax? Do we raise this money sales tax? Do we allow bridges to fall down? Do we not replace tracks when they become unusable? I mean, those are real questions that someone is going to have to wrestle with. I've laid out what we need to do on transportation, which is a sizable additional investment if we want to be competitive with Massachusetts and New York and New Jersey, who are, after all, our main competitors. If we want to compete with them, we're going to have to have a transportation system that is more like theirs than ours, and that's going to cost more money.
And it seems that if every week we hear about another school shooting happening throughout this country, and you know what it's like. You dealt with the situation at Sandy Hook, the tragic situation there. And Connecticut has some of the strongest gun laws in the nation, but other states have different laws. Do you think the only solution to ending these school shootings is by federal legislation?
Well, it's not the only way, because it would be the best way, but that's not going to happen. And so states are left to do the best they can in their own borders, and I think we've done an extraordinary job. I mean, Connecticut is one of the safest states in the country to live in. Our death rate is about 4.6 by the use of guns, is about 4.6 per 100,000, and that includes accidents, suicides, and other forms of homicide. So we must be doing something right. Violent crime has dropped more rapidly in Connecticut in the last 4 years than any other state in the nation by a third. We have fewer crimes being committed. We have fewer people going to prison. We have lower recidivism rates. I think when it comes to the criminal justice system and the laws that support that system, I think we have it pretty good. But then things happen, like someone using a bump stock to shoot 90 bullets per 10 seconds and kill 58 people at a concert and injure over 500 people at a concert in Las Vegas. We need to respond as a state when the federal government won't.
Yeah, and you just signed a bill that banned bump stocks in Connecticut. It's going to go into effect in October. Do you think this could help prevent school shootings here in Connecticut?
Well, I think our hope, obviously, is it will. But you know, bump stocks are going to be manufactured in other states, and they have the potential of being transported here. So to go back to your original question, we would be better to have federal laws. But you know, I don't think Republicans in the Congress, largely Republicans, some number of Democrats, are willing to stand up to the NRA. Who, you know, quite frankly, spends a lot of money in getting those folks elected, is a one-issue cause, and therefore can drive some number of people to participate in elections on that one issue.
Yeah, and then you just said the NRA has gone after you in the past, and you've called it a terrorist organization in the past.
No, I said they acted like a terrorist.
You said they acted like a terrorist organization.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
They don't throw the actual bomb. They don't actually shoot people. They just make sure the people who want to shoot people have the availability of guns.
Do you think a lot of people talk about the issue of the NRA having grapplings over members of Congress? Do you think that's one of the issues that we haven't seen it get passed in Congress?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, I think they buy in a lot of political goodwill in the financial donations they make to federal candidates in particular, and you know, since a lot of folks in state government, governors around the country, think they're going to run for president someday. They don't want to take the issue on. A lot of people serving in state legislatures think they might run for Congress or Senate someday. They don't want to take on the NRA, and as a result, we have children dying in schools.
Yeah, and I'm going to start talking about the governor's race that's coming up right now. It's been in full swing. The convention's just happened, and it looks like Ned Lamont. He's the front runner on the Democratic side, and you ran against him in 2010. And you guys, it was a really bitter campaign. You ran many attack ads against each other. Would you be happy with Ned Lamont as the Democratic nominee?
I wouldn't. I don't think it was so bitter, and I don't think it was so difficult. It was a political campaign.
We just saw him here today.
And yeah, if you're running for governor, you spend a lot of time in Hartford.
Yeah.
So I think if Ned is the Democratic nominee, and he certainly is the nominee at the convention process, that he'll be a formidable candidate.
Yeah. Are there any Republican candidates that you'd be happy with?
I think it's highly unlikely that I will be voting for any candidate, Republican candidate. I think that again, I think what I see happening is people falling into a willingness to not speak the truth about the issues that face Connecticut, or to ignore legal realities. I think that's going to plague the discussions that we have in the coming months in Connecticut about who our next leader should be.
And were you disappointed when Lieutenant Governor Wyman said she wouldn't seek your office?
No, I think that was a very personal decision for Nancy, who's a very good friend of mine, to make, and I would have supported her if she wanted to run, and I certainly recognize that she's had a long and illustrious public career.
Yeah. In January, you're going to leave this office, and when President Obama left, he took a very long vacation. Do you think you're going to do the same?
I think I'll take a long vacation, maybe a week or so.
Yeah. Any ideas where yet?
No, I don't know what my wife and I will do, but I'm actively working on what my next career will be.
Yeah. Do you have any plans for the future that you like to share?
Just that I'll be working. Yeah. I like to work. I like to be busy, and I'm looking for something that I can use my skill set on, and that I'll find rewarding.
There was some speculation that maybe you'd be interested in being the next president at UConn. Would you be interested in that, you think?
That I think is speculation.
Yeah,
the reality is that I was shocked when I heard that President Herbst was deciding not to seek continued appointment there. I think she's been a great president, and you know, all of that is new. I have taught at colleges and universities. I've participated in higher education as well as elementary education. It's an area that I have an interest, but if you're asking about the University of Connecticut and whether that was ever on my screen, the answer was no.
And I want to finish up with some personal questions. Do you have any hobbies?
Yeah, I suppose I have things that you could call hobbies. I work out a lot. I run a lot. Do a fair amount of exercise. I think those I put into that hobby interest category. My wife and I enjoy the arts. You know, tomorrow night I'll be at a play with my wife. We go to a lot of museums. We've collected some number of antiques and art as well. So we do that together. I think my favorite hobby is spending time with my wife.
Yeah. And do you have any favorite sports teams?
I grew up in Stamford, and so I tend to be New York centrist.
Yeah,
so the New York football Giants and the Yankees in particular, and the Rangers in particular. I'm a hockey fan.
Are you a Boston College fan?
Boston College fan, as you might well imagine.
My dad went there. Yeah.
And I did, and my wife did, and one of my sons did. So.
Yeah. And I want to finish up with a very difficult question. I've asked every single person I've interviewed this. Connecticut's really well known for its pizza places. Do you have a favorite in the state? You could say this now. You have no election.
No, I'm a Pepe's fan. I think in the New Haven variety of pizza.
I'm a Sally's fan.
Okay, and
Any local places?
Yeah, no, there's Harry's up in there's two Harry's in West Hartford. The one that's next to Big Y, Corbin's Corner, I think it's Corbin's Corner, is my favorite. I think that's that area of West Hartford. Great pepperoni. In fact,
Is that your favorite pepperoni?
well, I'm big on Pepe's pepperoni.
Yeah. Depends where you go.
But Harry's no, excuse me, at Bishop's Corner. Harry's at Bishop's Corner it runs a strong, a very strong product.
All right, Governor, thank you very much for coming on. This was great.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, go to my website, ravingryan.com. Go give the governor a follow on Facebook and Twitter, and give me a follow on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you for watching. Reporting for Raving Ryan, I'm Ryan Anastasio.